Milgram's experiment on obedience to authority is one of many examples that show how humans will give up their own dignity and override their own moral compass to appease the agenda of a so-called authority figure. In short, a participant would deliver an electric shock to a person in a separate room who could not see them, but the participant delivering the shock could very well see their own victim. When the learner in this experiment would get a question wrong, the participant would touch a button that caused the learner great pain. The more they got the questions wrong, the higher the voltage became. While watching the learning subject writhe in pain, sometimes to the point of begging to be let out or even dropping onto the desk seemingly dead, the participants would agree to continue hitting the button to deliver the electric shock. None of the participants took pleasure in delivering this pain. In fact, the majority of them would end up crying, trembling, and in a few cases even go into seizures due to the guilt from inflicting this torture. They simply didn't want to do it. And in a way, it was just as torturous to the participant as it was to the learner behind the glass. So why did they continue hitting the button despite completely knowing better within their own psyche and guts and soul altogether? Why would a person go against everything that they believe in as right or wrong and continue torturing an innocent person while understanding 100% how bad this activity or experiment was? Well, the reason they complied is because somebody told them to do it. It wasn't somebody wearing flannel like Mr. Ballin, and it wasn't somebody wearing a regular t-shirt. The person telling them to torture this innocent person happened to be wearing a lab coat. A lab coat that represented a figment of being in charge, a personification of authority. This study was not completely unethical. The learner behind the glass being electrocuted was an actor. The real learner in this study was instead the participant. Surprisingly, after the details of the study were revealed to the participants that they were indeed the actual experiment, most of them, through a gigantic sigh of relief, did not regret participating in the study. In a way, they had to face themselves now and be confronted with the fact that they would do absolutely heinous things if a person in charge gave them the permission to. There are many of this kind of study, some of which we will go into later, and believe it or not, this does get worse. But these studies yield results that are important for every human being to be aware of. It is important because the participants in these studies is you. Of course, you and I would never torture an innocent person because a figure of authority gave us permission to, but how can we be sure of that? How can we be sure that we, that is you and I, actually think for ourselves and are not subject to this brand of persuasion? Although these experiments are important, I don't think we necessarily need them to understand the results if our eye is open enough. Let me explain. I was in the checkout line at the local gas station, stuck behind a unit of ignorance on legs that was obsessed with which scratchy lottery was going to get them through their day. The much needed and necessary attendant at the gas station was long-necking it out of the front window every free moment that he had. This sparked my curiosity enough to ask them why they were so distracted by whatever was happening outside that window. This person informed me that he was looking out for drive-offs. It turns out that if somebody steals $20 in gas, that money comes out of the gas station attendant's paycheck. He had already had 2 that week, and if this activity continued, he would practically be working for free. Despite companies making billions of dollars on fuel, a person making damn near minimum wage is jumping through hoops in order to make sure that they do not get robbed by his own employer. This is a person just like you and I, who needs to feed themselves and their family. When this person politely informed me that part of their job was to look out for drive-offs, it caused me to ask the question, when? I was asked to repeat myself. They said, when what? Well, when are you supposed to look for drive-offs? You attend the register, you make the coffee, you mop the floors, and a million other things that going in the back where all the magic happens. All the while, people are getting gas the entire time in multiplicities. At what point are you supposed to stop your duties to the station and become a security guard for these mega corporations? The realization that their job description was not only inhumane, but in fact absolutely impossible. To put it bluntly, the company that he worked his ass off for found a new way to rob him. Not rob him for their own benefit, but for the benefit of the corporations above the owners of the station. They say shit rolls downhill, but this essential employee employee was breaking his back on behalf of people who are currently on yachts eating shrimp that are hopefully completely full of shrimp feces, as they well deserve. But I digress, as that karma will catch up to them without my interference. The point is that we don't need these social experiments to understand the implications of obedience to authority. When it comes to those who take advantage of other human beings using survival as bait, pennies for them is the equivalent of survival for this essential employee. And instead of being rewarded, he is punished for something that is completely out of his control. This example is one of many that I am sure you, the viewer, can think of yourself. One might connect the experiments of Pavlov's dog with the bells and whistles of a factory or a school setting. One might come to understand that, much like Zimbardo's prison experiment, there is an ocean of gap between two equal human beings, one that dangles the carrot and the other one that is futile in just trying to feed themselves. These implications do not rest solely in the workplace, but instead shines its ugly face in almost every facet of reality. To think that this is an accident is as ignorant as the person in line in front of me obsessed with these scratchy lotteries. This flaw in the system is no accident. We have no choice but to connect the dots at this point and understand clearly that this is a design. Those familiar with this channel understand the agenda of the Archons, for example. Those in depth with this channel will understand that those Archons are most likely projections of our own consciousness. In this way, I implore to you that there is no better example of this esoteric concept than that which is not esoteric at all. In fact, this is what we call everyday life. And like the primordial man of our last video that just needed to survive the predators thirsting for their blood, we now have a new genre of predation to combat. What is the fire that can make us impervious to this exploitation of our daily suffering? Unfortunately, as Carl would imply, to find that answer, we will have to dive headfirst into the darkness and face the reality in which disturbs us to our core. So I want to place a verbal disclaimer here that the contents of this video involves information that is so vile it might as well just be denied by some people who can't face the ugly side of human nature. If what you just heard in the intro at all is disturbing to you, just choose another video. I will literally not blame you at all, as I myself was nearly brought to tears 3 separate times while researching for this video. But it is not going to stop me from reporting my own speculations on the subject, because I feel it is as important as any other of the subjects covered on this channel. This one just so happens to hurt more. Amongst other experiments to be mentioned is Zimbardo's prison experiment. In 1971, Stanford University split 2 groups of absolutely biologically equal people, as we are all in fact equal, without question, into dualities. The experiment was actually quite simple. One group was in charge and the other group was not. Those in charge and those not in charge was based on absolutely no criteria other than a person of authority saying so. And in fact, these volunteers even knew that this was a study. Some were made to be guards and the others were made to be prisoners. And this was of course known to all to be make-believe. Those deemed as prisoners were stripped of their individual identities by being dressed similarly. So, unbelievably so, on the first day of the experiment, those deemed as guards began abusing the prisoners by having them stand for obnoxious amounts of time, and in one case would spray them with fire extinguishers. The so-called prisoners in the experiments who did not enjoy this treatment were quickly put into solitary confinement, which was made up by the so-called guards. But they were in charge, so that's what happened. Zimbardo expected the experiment to to last for a couple of weeks, but within the first couple days, a nervous breakdown took place within one of the prisoners, despite being told he could leave at any point. The other prisoners were coerced into chanting various low blows to the prisoner's character under the impression that they would be punished for his weakness. When the man who had that nervous breakdown heard these chants, he was so humiliated that he decided to stay in the study against his own will, but also very much to his will. All of a sudden, he was not going to leave his other prisoners behind, despite the fact that he could leave anytime he wanted, and so could anyone else. The researchers, including Zimbardo, had to reassure the man that this was not real and only an experiment. But despite being reassured that this was all make-believe and that anyone could leave at any point on their own accord, the abuse went on and became worse and worse. This study was shut down in under 6 days due to ethical reasons. At this point, I would like to remind you that these subjects were picked at random and were regular people, exactly the same as you and I. When I was researching for this video, I was expecting results more like the groupthink experiments where people would choose an obviously wrong answer because everyone else did. But unfortunately, this experiment, like many others, had absolutely heinous results, some of which I will not mention here on this channel. In both of these experiments, there were, loosely speaking, some common denominators that caused the results that surprised us all. Even though these common denominators are not universal and do not necessarily apply to each specific study, there does seem to be a common theme, and I will list them here. One is that the commands were given by an authority figure rather than another volunteer. Two, the authority figure was present in the room with the subject. 3, the learner was in another room, or in some cases separated by sunglasses, reducing eye contact. And 4, those subjected to the mistreatment were under the impression that the authority figures were legitimate, despite some cases even being told that they were not. But in all cases, people would justify their behavior by blaming the authority figure rather than themselves as individuals. There is also this reoccurring theme of not wanting to be rude or to offend the authority figure, even if it was made clear that it was a game. And then there is this so-called foot in the door phenomenon, where people will obey easy orders at first and then feel overwhelmingly compelled to obey more and more heinous acts as they increase in degeneracy gradually. They don't seem to notice when it goes from bad to worse, or be able to draw a line between a game and a complete lack of ethics. When the commands are set up in a motion of going from small to big, they just don't know when to stop. Very much like our video entitled Transcending the Circus World, we are hypnotized and programmed to believe that this is all normal and that the puzzle pieces fell into place on purpose by somebody who is wise. Well, no. It turns out this is all chaos, and we are organizing it with our turmoil the best that we can. With an open eye and a clear mind, it is not hard to notice that 99.9% of us get our main source of income from the very same egregore that has charts and graphs used to study and figure out new ways to steal that same income back from us. Basically attempting through research of psychology and science to get more work out of us for less means of survival. Ironically, the very same survival that it takes for us to do the work. They are biting themselves in their own ass without even realizing it. Meanwhile, we are the ones jumping through hoops. And you bet your ass, just like the circus, those hoops are on fire. Regular people, just like the subjects wearing lab coats, can make people do terrible things. Regular people who are so-called put in charge of nothing often become abusive, like the prison guards in the previous experiment. We give our freedom and dignity away to regular people because they have been appointed that position by absolutely no objective merit. I find it to be true that the real measure of a man can be concluded by what he does with power. What his character becomes when appointed with a pseudo amount of influence dictates who he is within and without. A perfect example of that involves, well, you guessed it, Money. A child born to parents with money will go to college and get more money, thus having opportunities for power. They will, in turn, have no real troubles or worry in life, thus creating a void and soulless character, like a sleeper or an NPG. Meanwhile, an absolutely brilliant mind born to a family without money might end up working at that very same gas station where fuckface is obsessed with scratchy lotteries. This essential employee, in this case overqualified for this position, knows better, and I tell you, I cannot think of a worse kind of torture. And of course that poor child can rise up out of that suffering, yes, but at an extreme disadvantage. He has to sacrifice so much more of his life and health to get where he deserves to be. Like 14 hours of editing. Cough, cough. While the rich child goes on to become a doctor who ruins health by just following orders, saying, hey, I'm just doing my job. Or in the case of an artist born into money who has no imagination because of his own lack of character, thus painting our entire world more and more gray, despite the meaningless colors that he splatters onto his self-indulged work. It used to be that the artists that died of impoverishment were the ones that we admired. But now it doesn't take much to look at the fine art community to see that the rich, spoiled kids of today have taken over, spreading their lack of talent and character and calling it quality. We can clearly see with our own eyes that this artwork sucks. Let's take a look at the second experiment we spoke of, where the subjects wore sunglasses to hide eye contact. People sometimes become despicable when they are behind a veil of identity obscurity, so to speak. This reminds me of road rage and, well, internet comments. I don't see a lot of that here, by the way. To be honest with you, it's absolutely staggering. In this particular community, I'm telling you right now that all of you are a real phenomenon. Have been very kind and loving even during disagreements. Our discussions are worlds beyond what I have seen on other channels, and it's a vibe. It's a vibe. He says it better. The quick side note being that every time I see a hater pop up in the comments here, instead of attacking them on my behalf, you guys have seemed to comment back loving support, encouraging them to shed their skin. This has happened without my intervention whatsoever. That is so rare on YouTube, I can't help but recognize it and say, holy shit, thank you. But I digress, and let's get back to more of this dark shit. Everyone is familiar with the studies coined as Pavlov's dog. When a bell is rang and food is dispensed, the dog will begin to salivate even before the food is presented. On a lighter note, this reminds me of ice cream trucks, and for some reason, I feel like I don't even have to explain that. But unfortunately, it also reminds me of the bells and whistles that go off at schools, factories, and, well, within your pocket right now. We have been programmed just like those dogs to respond to a particular stimulus. Once we recognize and understand the stimulus, though, it becomes easy to not only overcome, but to transcend. On an unfortunately darker note, Pavlov did not just ring bells. There are studies that show that when torturing a well-trained dog, his training will be erased. Much like a man named you-know-who was recently found guilty of dropping beagles off of balconies to study their suffering. A dog that is put through torture cannot only be reprogrammed, but the new tricks, once they are presented after that torture, can actually remain with the dog terminally. This new training cannot be overcome. The tortured being connected to the suffering in the first place seems to override our fight or flight response system. And unlike the previous training, it takes a hold of our core survival mechanism. The people who are in control, in power, understand this well, and make no mistake about it, if you and I have access to this information, so do they. Knowing this, let's just take a simple glance at our news sources and social media. A viewer of this channel knows quite clearly that the news is a programming system to spread fear. We also know that this fear creates a divide and conquer type of agenda, but unfortunately, this goes deeper than just that. Just like the dogs tortured in Pavlov's experiments and you-know-whos, when we receive this slow drip of suffering from our major media outlets, it is exactly the same routine. A routine now exacerbated after understanding the results of these experiments. When exposed to this extreme amount of suffering, we empathetically suffer ourselves. This makes us, by all means, subject to being reprogrammed, a programming that in this case cannot be undone without bringing the unconscious to the surface of our consciousness, which can be very uncomfortable, but also very necessary. We are not considered people by those who are in power. We are familiar with recent stories of the alien invasions in Peru. The news has repeatedly called these people tribesmen who live in villages, despite the clear footage showing that they live in houses and drive on roads and have lights, toilets, jobs, etc. They are people. They are us. But the news has no problem coloring them in such a light that makes it easy for us to swallow, therefore easily forgettable. Yet, whenever they want to scare you, they tell you that it is your grandfather who is dying on the breathing machine. A dear friend of mine, Michael, was playing a war-based video game on his phone. I saw that he would sacrifice an entire group of digital soldiers for the gain of his own power within the simulation. We have to understand that this is exactly how they see us. They see us as digital NPGs in their own game of power. When they look at soldiers dying in war, it is as if they are looking down on a screen, thus looking down on us. Like pawns on a chessboard, where they are not even kings on the board, but instead they are the players. I assure you, just like the experiments listed above, they are people just like you and I. But I also assure you that just like those programmed to think that regular people are an authority figure, it is easy to be tricked into looking up to them. It's like being mugged by somebody in the street but not calling the police because they are the ones doing the dirty work for those who are coined as authority. Real wisdom that comes from real character and experience seems to be shadowed by those who are in control, sanitizing all information that they don't see fit to their own bias, moral, and monetary gain. Today, we dismiss the lessons of myth and theology, systems which are pure, unobstructed channels of learning and passing down of knowledge and wisdom. Instead, we adhere to systems of confusing technical terms and jargon that place information over our heads. This is so that the information can't be followed to the source. We have laid down our right-sided brain knowing in lieu of our left-sided brain logic. And in some cases, we succumb to the overwhelming power of the lower reptilian brain underneath our mammalian cortex. That reptilian portion of the brain, that amygdala, is clever and cunning but unsympathetic. This portion of the brain is based in a power struggle of fight or flight. Kill or be killed. This biological system is no longer necessary, as there is clearly an abundance on Earth for everyone everywhere. I mean, how could we miss that? It almost seems as if information is filtered through a man in a suit and a tie sitting behind a computer who decides on behalf of the men working of what is right from wrong. I mean, it almost makes me wonder if the tie was invented so that the wearer could just hang themselves efficiently the moment that they realize what their life meaning has become in the first place. Oh, no offense to anybody wearing a tie currently. It's a joke. Is it though? I don't know. So take a look at what diamonds have become, for example. We know that diamonds are not rare at all, but we still utilize them as a symbol of love despite knowing better because of public pressure. We are tricked into thinking that There is a bar set, a bar based in money that defines how much you love a person based on how much of your income you're willing to give up for a rock that is abundant in nature, yet coined rare by salesmen in a tie. Salesmen who themselves probably don't know better, but you do. We do. And by acting accordingly, the people wearing that suit and tie, so to speak, selling us the bullshit, will have no choice but to fall into place. Whether it be diamonds, gasoline, time, or anything else. But I mean, I still understand with the diamond thing. Try explaining that to your in-laws, right? Like diamonds, coffins are not needed at all. We are told that if we love a person that we should gladly waste our money on a fancy burial for a corpse of empty flesh where your loved one no longer resides. Even if it means selling off their valuable goods to put them in this meaningless box, this rectangular cube, a vessel for atoms. This programming is so strong that just by hearing this, some people will become shaken down to their core. And I'm sorry, but we've been tricked. You can bury somebody in your own backyard and by doing so get a tax write-off for your entire house and not have to pay personal property taxes anymore. I mean, look it up for yourself. In the 90s, every news station was prevalent with results from a scientific study that concluded that sugar was perfectly safe. They say follow the science. Well, in this particular case, I say we follow the money because that scientific research was funded by Coca-Cola. Sugar is extremely dangerous and addictive. Science has also shown that a glass of wine per day is actually healthy. And well, guess who funded that scientific study? We were told that marijuana and psilocybin mushrooms are dangerous based off of real scientific research, peer-reviewed research, only to find out that those studies were funded by Anheuser-Busch. I don't have to tell you that these plants are perfectly safe and, in fact, very healthy in the case of psilocybin, which is extremely neuroregenerative. It makes you smarter and healthier. But what I do feel like I need to tell you is that unlike what we were told in DARE class, no one on earth has ever jumped out of a window on mushrooms thinking that they could fly. It literally has never happened in history, which brings us to what we already know about propaganda on the news. Propaganda, which is, like the scientific studies, also bought and paid for according to the agenda of those getting their kicks from our suffering, these egregores living upstairs in their ivory towers. I mean, they saw very clearly in the 60s that psilocybin caused us to realize their bullshit, and they quickly made it illegal with these two very specific ways to influence us. Long ago, we were told that uranium is not dangerous to our health, and a lot of people died of cancer because of this. Not so long ago, however, we were told that lead was perfectly safe, and despite how many cases came up because of the infections from lead. So when scientific studies tell us today that fluoride is good for our teeth, and oh boy, I can just hear people bitching right now. It doesn't take long to take a look for yourself and find that those studies were done to benefit municipal waste companies who made it a way to expose of this toxic chemical. If you can't dump it into the environment, what better place to put it than into us and our children? The scientific research, so to speak, that said that fluoride was good for our teeth happened in 1901 based on absolutely no scientific merit whatsoever. And it still rings out to this day. The science was flawed. What is not flawed is the studies that find that fluoride makes mammals docile. All of a sudden, the mouse does not have any urge to escape from its cage, or even care to. Yes, by all means, we should follow the science. That is to say, the science, not the people funding it. Before we follow anything as truth, we should first follow the money. And no, I'm not going to mention what you are thinking of right now because I want to keep my channel. And hey, being that you are already thinking of it, I don't have to say it. But still remains the fact that many people are still unable to hear it. And when I say unable to hear it, I mean exactly that down to the word. I am not saying that they are refusing to hear it. I am saying that they are quite literally unable to. And we should feel blessed that we have these eyes to see, but I mean, damn, what a blessing and a curse. Many times over, rats have been found to help another rat to escape from its trap once it itself is freed from its own. Once free, the rat goes out of its way to set its friend free and is happy to share what is left of the bait with him. As surprising as it sounds, perhaps us, the human species as a whole, should take a hard lesson from rats.
A better life than a